Well, welcome now to the rather belated final video of the beginnings of Scottish opera. We're going to start with music. We're going to start with an extract from Richard Strauss's Der Rosenkavalier. And this is the scene called in which the rose is presented to Sophie. If you know the story, you'll know what that's all about. And it's presented by Octavian, who is the young lover of the aristocratic Marschallin, an older woman in the opera. This, I think, is the most sheerly beautiful of the four operas that we're hearing Scottish opera perform. Maybe not the best, but certainly it's glorious, glorious music. So without further ado, here we have Teresa Cahill as Sophie and Anne Howells as Octavian in that scene, the presentation of the rose. And so the venture begun with such high hopes in 1961, expanded. Aberdeen and Stirling were added to the list of Scottish cities in which Scottish opera performed. The company travelled into England in 1966. They ventured to the Maggio Musicale Festival in Florence with Britain's opera Albert Herring. In 1969, the royal family paid their first visit to Scottish opera. By 1971, just 8 years after those three speculative productions in 9 years before, they were offering 12 operas in a season, 89 performances altogether of Der Rosenkavalier, The Barber of Seville, The Rake's Progress, Albert Herring, The Turn of the Screw, La Traviata, The Magic Flute, and Don Giovanni, and the 4 great operas which make up Wagner's Ring, a real achievement that. In 1972, there were 97 performances, and in 1973, 120. Thus, from modest but energetic, committed beginnings, great success was achieved. Everyone recognised that none of it would have been possible without for Gibson, who had the vision and the commitment to set the ball rolling. A small but highly capable group of like-minded supporters, and an orchestra willing and able to participate. If you go to the Theatre Royal, which is now the home of Scottish opera, you'll see a large portrait of Gibson by David Donaldson, fittingly drawing attention to the man who made it all happen. And so we shall leave them now, or at least in just a moment. The company still exists, of course, severely restricted as we all are by the constraints of COVID, but opening again in spring, all being well, with a programme featuring rising stars of opera, a production of The Gondoliers in London, Britain's Midsummer Night's Dream, a double bill of Rachmaninoff and Stravinsky, Don Giovanni, and a lesser-known operetta by Gilbert Sullivan, Utopia Limited. I would just like to read a list of the composers of the operas that Scottish Opera has presented to the public in all those years, because it's such an impressive list and such a long list. I think Scotland has a very good reason to be very proud of this venture. And so we have them. Donizetti, Mozart, Carl Davis, Leonard Bernstein, Offenbach, Menotti, Wolf Ferrari, Susanna's Secret, Rossini, Puccini, Bizet, Janacek, Verdi, Richard Strauss, Gilbert and Sullivan, Britain, Wagner, Kurt Weill, Weber, Edmund Harper. They commissioned operas from Scottish composers, very successfully in many cases. Handel, Cavalli, Gounod, Alban Berg, Rimsky-Korsakov, Humperdinck, Massenet, Tchaikovsky, Johann Strauss, John Gay, Gluck, Fiddler on the Roof, My Fair Lady, Smetana, Thea Musgrave, Debussy, Holst, Purcell, Thomas Wilson, Hans Werner Henze, Robin Orr, Mussorgsky, John McCabe, Ian Hamilton, Monteverdi, Berlioz, Stravinsky, Beethoven, John Purser, Dalla Piccola, and Ravel. A long, mixed, adventurous list brought to Scotland by these people who ran the opera. Well done them. And so we end with music, of course, with the final scene of Rosenkavalier, with Anna Howells as Teresa Cahill and Teresa Cahill as before, this time joined by Helga Dernesch, who played the Marschallin. By the way, I think Janet Baker was the first Octavian, or the Octavian in the first production of Rosenkavalier, and I understand that she was uneasy about taking the role, that Gibson had to persuade her, but that in the end it was a tremendous success and she was very pleased that she had done it. But here is a slightly later production, and these are the singers involved. In this scene, the final scene, what happens is that Octavian, who has been the lover of the much older Marschallin, now becomes the lover, or links up with the young Sophie. They're far closer in age. And the Marschallin recognises that her time is passing, that the years go by and you move on. It's a bittersweet scene, but you have Strauss again using these three female voices in some absolutely spine-tinglingly wonderful music. So, the final scene of Der Rosenkavalier, performed in the mid-1970s by Scottish Opera.